Coming up at New Day at Arirang. The day has finally come. South Korea will launch its first 100% domestically developed space rocket, Nuri, this afternoon. Its mission is to enter into low orbit 600 to 800 kilometers above Earth. South Korea is expected to see around 1,300 new COVID-19 infections Thursday, slightly inching down from the previous day. Meanwhile, the nation is forecast to fully vaccinate 70% of the population before Monday. And Bitcoin, the world's largest cryptocurrency in terms of market cap, shot up past the $66,000 mark to set a new record high on Wednesday, making a full recovery from a month-long slump.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on Thursday, October 21st here in Seoul, South Korea. We are edging ever closer to the weekend. I'm Mark Broom.
And I'm Kim Mo-Gan. It's great to have you with us. Over the next hour, we're going to be taking a look at the big news stories of the day and get some expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. Now we start with the Nuri rocket launch. The countdown is underway for a historic moment for South Korea's space industry. Now in the coming hours, the country will launch its first 100% domestically developed space rocket.
For more, we have our Kim Do-yeon at the press center near the launch site. That's as close as anyone can get to the action. Do-yeon, seeing that rocket model behind you there, I bet you're terribly excited to see history being made with your own eyes.
Good morning, guys. And yes, I certainly am. I'm at the NATO Space Center at Gyeongsang County in Jeollanam-do Province. And as you mentioned, with the NATO's model behind me, this is where South Korea's space program happens. It's about a 5-hour drive away from you in Seoul, but our team is here to get as close to the rocket launch as possible. The launch of Nuri, or KSLV-2, is scheduled for 4 p.m. Korea time. That's around 8 hours from now. It's a 3-stage liquid fuel rocket carrying a mock payload weighing 1.5 tons. The goal for it is to enter into low orbit 600 to 800 kilometers above Earth. Roughly $1.7 billion was spent on this project, 4 times the amount spent on NATO. The Korea Aerospace Research Institute, along with 300 private companies, has been working on Nuri for 11 years. Together, they assembled 370,000 parts to build this space vehicle.
Well, now, Do-yeon, everyone in Korea has high hopes that everything goes smoothly. But when will we ever know if it has been a success?
Right, so 16 minutes after the takeoff, the goal is to have the dummy satellite put into orbit. But it'll take 30 minutes for the control room to actually know and check the data. The success rate is about 30%, but the launch is not a one-time thing. As a country, South Korea is in the process of development, which means we have to launch the rocket multiple times to check and fix any flaws. 4 more launches are already penciled in, with the next one scheduled for May 2022. Countries can't share aerospace technology, especially if it's related to space rockets, as the tech could be used to develop weapons. If Nuri's launch is successful, South Korea would become just the 7th country in the world to send a 1-ton satellite into space. Last night, the rocket was erected and its umbilicals have since been connected, meaning it's ready to launch on schedule as of now, but the final confirmation will come in a couple of hours. As of now, they will fuel the rocket at around 2:30 p.m., some 90 minutes prior to the scheduled blast-off.
Well, just checking behind you, the weather seems pretty clear. Doesn't seem overly windy, so let's hope for that 4 p.m. launch. I know I'll be tuning in to watch it. But how's the atmosphere among staff there? The engineers must be excited, but also under a tremendous amount of pressure.
That's right. The eyes of Korea will be on this small island of about 2,000 residents at 4 p.m. Korea time. It's usually peaceful with beautiful beaches and campsites, but I would say that the scientists and engineers might not have had their best night's sleep last night. I was actually here a week ago to check up on them. I asked them what they thought about the launch and the public's expectation. 2 engineers who have been working tirelessly over the past decade say everything they can do has been done and the rest is out of their hands.
There's a lot of pressure, so even if tested numerous times, as you know, a rocket has more than 300,000 parts. But those parts have to work as planned and according to our sequence. We work as hard as we can, but there's always going to be a pressure for us.
As engineers, we believe that the launch will 100% be a success. But as all things do, even if we believe in it, unless destiny is on our side, it may not go our way.
20 years of rocket science under his belt. Still, every single launch is special.
I've cried at all my launches. I don't even know why. For this one too, the time I've spent on it could flash before my eyes. I don't know, but I've never felt such pressure before, so I don't even know if I'll be able to cry this time.
Whether it succeeds or not, the launch of Nuri is extremely valuable to the engineers.
Even if we don't succeed this time around, we'll be gaining a lot of new technology. We can analyze the aspects we succeed at and the ones that we didn't, and improve on them to make the second one a success.
This is a model of Naro, a rocket developed with Russia that had 2 failed launches before its successful launch 9 years ago. Everyone is hoping that Nuri succeeds on the first time of asking. But what's just as important is that the country dared to try. There's a great deal of pride among the local residents who, after seeing the facility being built all those years ago, are now able to see how far Korea's space development has come.
Nuri launch is amazing for us because we used to rely on foreigners, but now it's South Korean technology. This will bring joy to our island.
Cheers and wishes have come from all across the nation. Citizens wrote messages to hang on this tree at the National Science Center, which have since been delivered to the engineers.
우리나라가 이제 우주로 이제 한 걸음 더 나아가는 그런 계기가 될 거라고 생각합니다.
누리호 연구하셨던 박사님들 많이 고생 많으셨고요.
누리호 성공을 기원합니다. 누리호 화이팅!
Now that was our Kim Do-yeon at NATO Space Center in Kohung. Thank you for your report, and we will connect back to you later, Do-yeon.
Yes, thank you very much, Do-yeon. And Do-yeon and the rest of our news team here at Arirang will keep you up to date on the launch throughout the day. Have fun, Do-yeon. Keep updating us, and we'll connect you over the course of the coming hours. Thank you.
Now in other news, North Korea claims its recent missile launch was not directed at the U.S., instead expressing concerns over movements by the international community.
Yeah, and this likely triggered as the UN Security Council convened a closed-door meeting Wednesday to discuss the regime's latest provocation. Yoon Jung-min with this report.
North Korea says its test launch of a SLBM this week is not directed at the U.S., saying it had been pre-planned long ago for the regime's national defense, and there is no need for the U.S. to be worried. Its central news agency reported Thursday that the North Foreign Ministry officials said there would be no tensions on the Korean peninsula if they are not bothered for exercising its sovereignty. The official pointed to a double standard from the U.S., who criticized development of the same weapons that the U.S. already owns or develops. The official said the regime has already expressed deep concerns over a UN Security Council meeting. The United Nations reportedly convened an emergency closed-door meeting on Wednesday at the request of the U.S. and Britain regarding the North's missile launch. Ahead of the UN Security Council meeting on Wednesday, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield urged North Korea to refrain from further provocations and engage in sustained and substantive dialogues for the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. She reiterated that the U.S. has offered to meet North Korean officials without any preconditions and that Washington has no hostile intent toward the regime. The American diplomat called a series of missile launches illegal and unacceptable, calling on the North to abide by Security Council resolutions. Other European countries, including Ireland, France, and Estonia, strongly condemned the North's launch of the ballistic missile, saying it amounts to a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. They also called on the international community to strictly maintain sanctions against the regime. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Sanctions relief will be reviewed if North Korea returns to the negotiating table. Now, this is the word from South Korea's foreign minister, who also pointed out on Wednesday a formal end to the Korean War is the first step needed to restart the peace process. Our Peunji has more.
South Korea's foreign minister Chung Eui-yong has said that Seoul will consider easing sanctions against the North if Pyongyang resumes dialogue. During a parliamentary audit session on Wednesday, he said Seoul needs to take some kind of action to prevent the North from developing any more nuclear weapons or missiles, and added that sanctions relief could be considered as part of the efforts, on the condition that the North accepts the dialogue offer. This comes hours after Pyongyang announced that it has successfully fired a new type of submarine-launched ballistic missile. When asked if U.S. thinks the same, Chung said he believes so, as Washington has been making it clear that it will discuss any issues on the negotiating table if the North returns to talks. The foreign minister also emphasized that the end-of-war declaration proposed by President Moon Jae-in is the very first step, and a step that we must take in order to restart the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. He said a formal end to the Korean War is a way to build trust, and that it will create an atmosphere for dialogue. Regarding ties with Japan, Chung said President Moon strongly hopes to improve ties between Seoul and Tokyo. He said the phone call between the president and Japan's new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida went, quote, very well, referring to their talks last Friday over compensation for wartime forced labor. He added that the foreign ministry will also do its best to resolve this issue. Peunji, Arirang News.
The number of daily COVID-19 infections in South Korea has been on a wave of ups and downs lately, and the latest figure confirmed as of 9 p.m. last night was over 1,200.
Now, that is a touch lower than the previous night's figure, but still 200 higher than what we were seeing at the start of the week. For more on the numbers and other updates, joining us in the studio is our COVID-19 correspondent, Kim Yeon-sung. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, is there any reason to believe this uptick? It isn't huge or anything like that, but is there any reason to think that it might potentially derail the government's living with COVID-19 scheme that's supposed to start on November 1st?
Well, it doesn't seem like it for now. South Korean health authorities are expecting around 1,300 infections for Thursday's official tally, and this figure does blend well into the overall downward trend that the country has been seeing lately. Authorities said Wednesday that they're currently drafting a comprehensive plan so the nation can gradually phase into living with COVID-19 from November 1st. Authorities are expected to announce specifics sometime this month. But if there's one thing we've learned 2 years into the pandemic, it's that with this coronavirus, you have to expect the unexpected. We can't rely on high vaccination rates to stave off infections, and there's no guarantee the downward slope of COVID-19 infections will always remain a downward slope. So if you look at Singapore, for example, they've already surpassed 80% in terms of vaccinations, and they were very hopeful of seeing an end to COVID-19 restrictions by October 24th. But unfortunately, their daily COVID-19 tally hasn't gone down despite the high vaccination rates. In fact, they've been seeing around 3,000 infections every day, with the tally reaching almost 4,000 earlier this week. So Singapore has decided to extend its social distancing measures, including the cap on gatherings, until late November. So I suppose the best approach for people in South Korea to take right now is to remain hopeful, but not complacent.
Right, then Yeon-sung, how is South Korea currently doing in terms of its vaccination?
Well, South Korea is actually doing very well. South Korea's top health officials says that the country will soon reach 70% of the population as fully vaccinated. The commissioner of the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, Chung Eun-kyung, said Wednesday the 70% figure will likely be reached this weekend or by Monday next week. And this milestone is very important, as it was a precondition for the resumption of the pre-pandemic lifestyle. South Korea's vaccination rate currently stands at 66.7%, and with the momentum we are seeing, there's a good chance the vaccination rate might even reach 80% by next month.
Yeah, that's pretty astonishing considering what most people would admit was rather a slow start in terms of vaccinations, that we could even hit 80% by next month. But that's South Korea. How about other countries in terms of their vaccine rollout?
Well, U.S. is looking to greatly expand their vaccination reaches. The Biden administration is currently prepping to vaccinate millions of children aged 5 to 11. U.S. officials on Wednesday outlined a plan for vaccinating children and said they've already acquired enough vaccines for roughly 28 million kids. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease specialist, says this is a step that is critical in curbing the spread. But as children has different needs compared to adults, health officials thought it'd be best if they were vaccinated in an environment they were more familiar with, like pediatric offices and schools. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is expected to announce its decision sometime in November. The FDA also just authorized booster shots for people who've had the Moderna or Johnson & Johnson shot. They're also allowing the mix and match approach, where people can get a different type of jab from the one they originally had. This expands the U.S. booster campaign to include tens of millions more people and gives more flexibility to health services.
Okay, now Yunsun, thank you for your report again today. We will talk to you again in our midday newscast.
Looking forward to it.
And now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest stories in the news right now. Pharmaceutical giant Merck and its partner Ridgeback Biotherapeutics have requested the FDA grant emergency approval for their antiviral COVID-19 pill. They say the experimental drug showed compelling results in a phase 3 clinical trial. Merck says the pill, called molnupiravir, cut the risk of hospitalization or death in patients with mild to moderate COVID-19 by about 50%. In fact, the Merck was so impressed that it decided to wrap the trial ahead of time and seek the emergency use authorization, or EUA.
Right, and this could be a game changer because if the FDA gives Merck the green light, the pill will be the world's first oral antiviral for COVID-19. Another antiviral we all know by now, remdesivir, can only be administered through an IV drip. For more on this, I'm pleased to say we are joined on Skype by Professor Michael Toole, Associate Principal Research Fellow at the Burnet Institute in Melbourne, Australia. Professor, having an oral option will be a big change and a huge step forward in helping us get back to normal life. Judging by the data you've been looking at, do you think the FDA will grant EUA to Merck for molnupiravir? And do we know how exactly it works in the body to combat the virus?
Good morning. Yes, this is a very exciting development. I don't want to second guess the FDA, but given the data that Merck has made available, it looks extremely promising. When you do what's called a randomized controlled trial of a new drug or vaccine, the researchers don't know the results. The results are reviewed regularly by an independent committee. And in this case, once they reached almost 800 people in the trial, the independent committee said, stop. This is a very effective treatment. It reduces hospitalization by about 50%. So that's exciting. We've never had a drug like that before.
And now let's hope for the FDA gets through this process as quickly as possible. Now, Professor, if the approval is granted, how quickly can this oral treatment be in the hands of doctors in the U.S. and distributed to those who have the virus?
Well, Merck is a very large pharmaceutical company and has the capacity to ramp up production. The US government has ordered, I think, 1.7 million doses. And South Korea, Singapore, and Australia have also put in orders. So it could be by the end of the year. I believe the FDA won't give a finding until November, and maybe even late November. So I think it's exciting. I didn't answer the previous question of how it works. It works directly to stop the virus from reproducing in the body. It's very similar to drugs you may be familiar with for influenza, like Relenza or Tamiflu, and of course a large number of drugs used in the treatment of people with HIV. So its big advantage is it has to be taken orally, whereas the other drugs like remdesivir and dexamethasone have to be given intravenously. It also has the potential to be quite cheap because the course produced by Merck costs about $700 US. But Merck has shared the license with 5 Indian generic drug makers, and they will almost certainly be able to produce the drug at a much lower cost. And so this will be very useful in low-income countries.
Yeah, that's wonderful if that's the case. You rarely hear of these big pharma companies sharing their medicines and whatnot with other companies to use. But we're told that while the fully vaccinated among the population can still contract COVID-19, they do have this higher degree of protection against severe illness and death. As a result of that, do you foresee this oral treatment being reserved exclusively, at least at the outset, while there's a kind of limited amount of them, for those who A, haven't been able to get vaccinated for whatever reason, and B, those who've opted against getting the jab?
Well, that will be a local decision for each country to make. As you say, it depends on the supply. If the supply is very limited, then it probably should be reserved for people who are considered vulnerable to severe infection. So that may be some fully vaccinated people who maybe were vaccinated 6 months ago and they have waning immunity, or they're elderly, or they have some underlying conditions. And then, as you said, for the unvaccinated. Now, the catch with this drug is you have to diagnose the infection early. So this should be given within 5 days of the infection or the onset of symptoms. So some countries may not have the capacity to test as much as a country like South Korea or Australia. So they will need support in ramping up testing. Also, this does not replace the vaccine. And we must not give out the wrong message to people that, oh, you don't have to get vaccinated because now there's a very good treatment. That would be a dangerous message. And of course, this drug will not prevent the spread of the infection. It will just prevent hospitalization.
Now, Professor, I'm afraid we will have to wrap up our discussion due to time constraints. We appreciate your insights and let's hope for the best. Professor Michelle Toole, Associate Principal Research Fellow at the Burnett Institute. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
The US has blasted China for its, quote, unfair trade practices. Reuters reports that the US Deputy Chief of Mission in Geneva, David Bisbee, made the remarks Wednesday during the World Trade Organization's periodic trade policy review. He accused Beijing of failing to be transparent over government subsidies on aluminum, electric cars, shipbuilding, semiconductors and more. He highlighted China's preferential treatment for state enterprises and intellectual property rights, as well as cyber theft. Bisbee said that, despite the 2019 US-China Phase 1 trade deal, fundamental issues remain unresolved. He added the US will pursue all means to secure reforms. The Federal Reserve says that while the US economy is still growing at a solid clip, labour shortages and supply chain bottlenecks are restricting growth and causing high inflation. According to the Fed's Beige Book on Wednesday, a lack of workers and inability for companies to obtain parts and supplies is hurting the American economy the most. It cited labour shortages 26 times compared to 6 in January and supply chain issues 37 times compared to just 9 back in January as well. Neither issues were mentioned at all prior to the pandemic. Despite shortages constraining growth, most businesses remain cautiously optimistic that conditions will improve in the months ahead. And on a semi-related note, Los Angeles Port, a major cog in the global supply chain, has been named as one of the world's least efficient ports, according to a report by the World Bank and IHS Merck, which reviewed 351 container ports around the world. LA was ranked 328th, behind a port in Tanzania. The adjacent port of Long Beach came in even lower at 333rd. The ports in LA and Long Beach make up some 40% of all shipping containers entering the US. The top honors on the ranking list went to ports in Japan and Saudi Arabia.
Now, Bitcoin on Wednesday hit a new all-time high of more than $66,000, surpassing its previous April peak as investors celebrated the successful launch of the first Bitcoin exchange-traded fund in the U.S. Kim Hyo-san tells us more.
Bitcoin, the world's most largest cryptocurrency in terms of market capitalization, soared past $66,000 on Wednesday to set a new record high. This marks a new record from Bitcoin's previous April peak of nearly $65,000, making a full recovery after a months-long slump. Watchers say this is closely in line with Tuesday's debut in the U.S. of the first Bitcoin-linked exchange-traded fund. The ProShares Bitcoin Strategy ETF, which monitors Bitcoin futures contracts and speculates on the future prices of the cryptocurrency, rose almost 5% on its first day of trading. Billionaire investor Paul Tudor Jones told CNBC on Wednesday that Bitcoin is a great hedge against inflation, adding that he prefers cryptocurrency over gold, but other investors remain critical due mainly to Bitcoin's price volatility. This was witnessed in June when Bitcoin plunged below $30,000 following a wave of criticism over the amount of energy consumed mining Bitcoin and China's crackdown on cryptocurrency. However, many experts say Bitcoin's soaring value marks a clear win for the cryptocurrency as it and other digital assets steadily achieve more acceptance on Wall Street. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for global insights and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Woo-kyung. It's now time for Global Insight, where we connect with experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. Geopolitical anxiety continues to brew in East Asia amid ever-growing tensions between the United States and China, most recently escalated by Beijing's military planes flying near Taiwanese airspace. Doubts surrounding the stability of China's massive property market has also been a source of concern, as defaults made by the heavily indebted sector could potentially destabilize China's financial system. We discuss these geopolitical and economic concerns surrounding China and whether the pressure will cause the authoritarian regime to tighten its grip on state affairs and reinforce its wolf warrior tactics. Today, we speak with James Palmer, Deputy Editor of Foreign Policy magazine. It's lovely to have you on the show, James. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Right, it's great to have you with us. And, well, to go straight into the questions, China's shown increasing aggressiveness towards Taiwan in recent weeks. And, well, it flew a record number of fighter planes in skies near the island, and it's constantly talked about forced reunification. Why has it become so pushy in recent weeks?
Well, there's several reasons. The first is that it was China's National Week. So there was a need for sort of more display, more pushing of the lines. It's also a very tense political atmosphere in China at the moment. And when politics gets tense in China, it means that individual careers are in danger. And everybody has this need to justify themselves. And the easiest way to justify yourself is by these kind of nationalistic performances. And that even includes, the People's Liberation Army. So even these generals, these officers are taking part in these kind of displays of performative patriotism, which in the case of the army is even more dangerous than with wolf warrior diplomats, because it means, actually these sort of border touching, like military displays, the intrusions into the ADIZ. And this brings with it, consequent risk. But there's no penalty in the Chinese system for getting nationalistic on Taiwan. There's nothing holding you back. You're always effectively going to be rewarded within the system for these kind of displays of aggression.
And well, China's recent antics, it's triggered a lot of nervousness around what's happened, especially among Taiwanese officials who have expressed concern that there could be war and some kind of miscalculation, even a military conflict due to such miscalculations. And well, the question is how far China will go to assert its claim over Taiwan.
I think we're unlikely to see, even an accidental war, because a war with Taiwan on China's part requires an enormous amount of preparation, of massing of forces, all these things that would be very visible. And while we've seen, these long-term infrastructure buildups and so on, we haven't seen the kind of concentration of forces that would be necessary. Now, it's possible that you could have a small-scale conflict, exchange of fire, so on, which would have created a very dangerous situation afterwards. But I don't think that we're going to blunder into war. And if you look at the polling of the Taiwanese public, they're worried, but they're not panicked. They've been through these kind of crises before, in the early 2000s and so forth, and they know that this normally calms down. I think the real worry is what Beijing's intentions are in the sort of mid to long term, when the possibility of invasion is looking, more and more likely by, I would say, the mid-2020s or the end of the decade.
And James, there are also questions surrounding the US's role in this. Do you think it's going to maintain its policy of strategic ambiguity?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't think any US administration would abandon that, because on the one hand, if you commit to Taiwan and end up not backing it up, you had this massive loss of face for the US and globally, and even that commitment worsens tensions in the first place. But you also want China to believe that the US might well intervene. So maintaining that ambiguity, like just what action the US would take in the event of Chinese invasion, is really critical. And a lot of the US positioning is always about trying to walk that line, trying to make sure that Beijing thinks that the US will intervene, that the US can act as a deterrent to Chinese invasion without ever actually explicitly saying it will.
And in recent weeks, we've heard a lot about China's financial woes as well, with the Evergrande crisis, this huge $300 billion debt crisis that China's second largest developer is facing. And well, many say that this really pales in comparison to China's $8.2 trillion debt bubble, with the country's outstanding local government financing vehicles, of course, which apparently amounts to roughly 52% of its GDP, according to estimates by Goldman Sachs. How precarious is China's financial system?
It's very risky at the moment, and things could go bad at any time. What they're trying to do at the moment, I think, is just kick the can down the road again. These debts have been building up for years, but we've seen this explosion of real estate debt, in particular since 2016, when the real estate sector ran up $3 trillion in debt alone. So Evergrande's, 300 million is only a fraction of that. But these issues have been building up since the late 1990s, since there were changes in the way that local government got their revenue, which caused them to start leaning very heavily on land sales. And we've just seen this kind of piling up and up and up, and it being constantly delayed to any kind of reckoning with it. Now, the government has been trying to impose some kind of restraints on the sector, to impose these 3 red lines that govern how much debt you can take on, all this kind of thing. But it's really not been successful so far. Over 50% of municipalities have missed the 3 red lines marker, and the government is really struggling. The central government is really struggling to try and keep this debt under limits and to contain the real estate sector without collapsing it.
Certainly seems like authorities have been doing their best to really dampen all this speculation over investing in the property market. But well, recently, from private tutors to online gaming and the mining of cryptocurrencies, it seems that Beijing authorities are cracking down on all sorts of economic activities. And well, why?
So there's a couple of reasons. Specifically, you have a panic over young people. There's been worries for a long time that young people are not productive enough, not masculine enough, not committed enough to the party. Those go back 10 or 15 years. You have all this language around, masculinity, around Chinese young men needing to be powerful, to be strong, not having strong enough bodies. It's quite creepy stuff. But it's become very intense in the last couple of years because the demographic figures are so dire. They lifted the one-child policy a few years ago, lifted the two-child policy this year. In theory, you can have as many kids as you want now, but in practice, nobody is having extra kids. There's been no baby boom. And so not only do you have them staring down the barrel of fewer and fewer people, that's created intense anxieties about just who are these kids that we do have? What's their quality? Are they committed? Have they become soft because of the West? And so a lot of this crackdown has focused on things that affect young people, like online gaming, like private tutoring, where you have this combination of trying to stop the sort of intense race over tuition spending, but also this crackdown on any kind of Western education, any kind of foreign textbooks, all this kind of thing. So this attempt to create a kind of, work-focused, masculine, uninfluenced by foreign ideas group of young people. But then on top of that, you have this desire by Xi to reassert party control across the economy, to really put the party front and center in everything. There's this perception, I think, that in the 2000s, which in many ways Xi is reacting against, corruption ran so out of control because these private sectors were given kind of full, free reign. But not just corruption, any kind of power, any concentration of sort of cultural capital, social capital in other sectors is seen by the party as an inherent threat to itself. And so you had, the takedown of Jack Ma because he was becoming effectively too popular a figure. Alibaba was becoming too ubiquitous a platform. But mixed into this in turn are all these, real worries, these legitimate concerns over the extent of, the use of people's personal data, over the rush to kind of to online finance that's seen a bunch of Ponzi schemes and other such measures erupt. And so you have these ideological concerns mixed in with these real regulatory worries that have created this atmosphere of kind of total, crackdown. And I think we're going to see a lot of kind of paralysis as a result.
And well, given these social demographic changes and also these changes in the economy, it does seem that the regime is sensing this need for social reform, which it has been emphasizing in recent years. And well, China also says it will become more global and continue to expand its Belt and Road Initiative projects. And it's also launched its own biodiversity initiatives. At the same time, it's unclear whether President Xi Jinping is going to join COP26 happening next week. Do you think China is going to continue to build up its own model of globalism and multilateralism with Chinese characters, or how do you think it's going to respond to Western pressure?
I think that we're going to see China becoming more insular and its demands on the rest of the world through its power more extreme. So, Belt and Road has mostly been a failure. We see these big numbers thrown around, but you've had multiple competing projects, you've had bankruptcies, these huge kind of initiatives that were supposed to materialize just haven't. What has happened is that China has started to make more demands over the speech of countries involved in Belt and Road projects, trying to get them on board to condemn attempts to speak out about the atrocities committed about the Uyghur, for instance, to force them to censor their own media where possible. So I think you have this, at the one time, this country that's becoming more insular, more hostile to the world, and at the same time is deeply desires to impose its will upon the world where it can.
Well, Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, they're set to meet before the year is up. What do you think they'll talk about? What will top the agenda? And do you think they can actually make any kind of meaningful progress on improving relations?
I don't think we'll see any meaningful progress. I mean, we almost never do from these kind of meetings. Where there is meaningful US-Chinese diplomacy is mostly conducted at a level below the leadership, sort of the level of, the smart diplomats and regulatory types. And even then, the overwhelming factor is always Chinese domestic concerns. You get these figures who are portrayed as being, having been friendly to the West in the past, but that was mostly because the times were more friendly to the West. And now we see them taking on more hardline poses, more hardline actions. So I think it'll be, 30 minutes of pleasantries and some kind of exchange of banal restatements of everybody's position over Taiwan, over trade and so on. I don't think we'll see anything important come from that summit.
And in the meantime, the United States Build Back Better World Infrastructure Initiative and Europe's own Global Gateway Strategy, they're designed to counter China's infrastructure network, the BRI that you mentioned. Do you think they're going to work in the long run, though? I mean, you can't ignore the years and years of Chinese effort that have really posed an alternative to sort of Western ideology and economic development model.
Well, I think that, firstly, neither of these projects has anything concrete behind it at the moment. They're entirely talk. And you've had this kind of panic sparked in Washington and Brussels by the Belt and Road Initiative that isn't really justified by its success or its numbers. Spending on Chinese foreign investment didn't go up at any faster rate during the years of Belt and Road. What you had was a political project that had Xi's stamp on it. And so all these Chinese firms rushed to say that they were part of it. But if you look at things like the actual trade routes that were supposed to be the key part of the Belt and Road, they've been failures. And so I think it's probably sensible for the West to, take a breath, look at where China has been successful and where it hasn't, rather than try and rush to these big grand projects against this imaginary sort of Marshall Plan style project that keeps being talked up as China's doing. Instead, just think about where can we smartly apply cultural, economic pressure against China? Where can we offer a realistic alternative to Chinese loans, Chinese funding, and so on, without compromising our own values? Because the appeal of Chinese money in a lot of cases is that it comes without those tricky strings of human rights and union conditions and industrial and worries about the supply chain attached. But on the other hand, it's increasingly coming with political demands from the Chinese end. And I think turning those against China, pointing out the unacceptability of these kind of demands that China is making, may be more effective than just throwing money at the problem.
Well, I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. That was James Palmer, Deputy Editor of Foreign Policy Magazine. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's long been established that an important catalyst to K-pop's global success is the long, intense, systematic, and some would say infamous training programs for aspiring performers, with Korean artists making waves and, in some cases, fortunes around the world. Wannabe pop stars from Southeast Asia are coming here to learn from the best in a bid to get their own big break. Shin Ye-eun with this report.
Lavish performances, perfect synchronization, and outstanding choreography. This is what K-pop idols show on stage, attracting fans from around the world. But what put them there is years of vigorous training.
Two Vietnamese pop groups came to South Korea for a 12-week intensive training program to see what K-pop idols go through before their long-awaited debut.
The two groups selected to benchmark successful K-pop artists were Super V, a three-member boy group that debuted in 2018, and O2O, a three-member unit produced from a nationally televised audition program in 2019.
Vietnam has one of the most established music industries and markets in all of Southeast Asia. And because it is culturally close with South Korea, we've decided to invite artists from Vietnam.
In Korea, they took a variety of classes, ranging from body fitness, dancing, and vocal lessons. They also learned Korean and visited traditional sites to get a taste of the culture. By the end of their 12-week program, they were able to cover popular K-pop songs and produce their own music videos to perform at the Asia Song Festival.
In Vietnam, we've only received training related to music. But here, we've learned a variety of things, including body designing, model walking. I think that was the biggest difference.
I was able to learn so much from this project. I would like to use the knowledge I have learned and become a multi-talented artist in Vietnam.
Behind their success were trainers who had years of experiencing developing trainees into renowned K-pop idols.
I've heard K-pop has become much more popular across the world. But to see these Vietnamese artists come to South Korea to learn from the best made me really realize the power of K-pop.
And cultural experts hope more artists from different countries can receive such intensive K-pop training.
We should always consider that K-pop and other cultural products can be used as such cultural bridge between different countries, which will contribute to the better relationship between countries and countries.
Under the title The Hallyu Project Grow Together, hosted by the Culture Ministry and COFIS, the Vietnamese artists learn what it takes for K-pop idols to successfully debut and will apply what they learned back home. Shin Yeun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. At least 20 civilians are presumed to be dead after the Syrian army on Wednesday attacked residential areas of rebel-led Erihad city. The attack on a busy marketplace in the area also killed children, as well as a teacher on their way to school. The attack comes as at least 14 people were killed and 2 others injured in a deadly bomb attack on an army bus in the Syrian capital of Damascus on Wednesday. The explosion took place during early morning rush hour as the army bus exploded while passing the President Bridge in central Damascus. 2 bomb explosions were reported, while a bomb squad soon defused a 3rd device installed on the bus. After the blast, Assistant Foreign and Expatriates Minister of Syria, Ayman Susan, said the attack was an expression of the terrorists' despair over the failure of their plots in Syria, adding that the Syrian government will continue to fight terrorism until it's completely eliminated. Mount Aso, a popular Japanese tourist destination, sent plumes of ash 3.5 kilometers high into the air when it erupted just before noon on Wednesday. According to the Japan Meteorological Agency, there were no immediate reports of casualties or damage. However, the agency raised the alert level for the volcano to 3 on a scale of 5, warning citizens to keep away due to risks of large falling rocks and pyroclastic flows within a radius of 1 kilometer around the mountain's Nakadake crater. The head of Japan's Volcanic Observation Division also warned that Mount Aso could erupt again. Mount Aso also saw a minor eruption in 2019, while the country's worst volcanic disaster in nearly 90 years killed 63 people on Mount Antake in 2014. For the first time, a kidney from a pig has been transplanted successfully into a human without triggering immediate rejection from the recipient's immune system, in a major advancement that could potentially save lives due to the dire shortage of human organs for transplant. The procedure was done at NYU Langone Health on Monday, and it involved a pig whose genes had been altered so that its tissues no longer contained a molecule known to trigger immediate rejection.
So basically what we did was we transplanted a kidney from a genetically engineered pig that had the main molecule that really defines the incompatibility of an organ, between a pig and a human, knocked out.
The recipient of the organ was a brain-dead patient with signs of kidney dysfunction, whose family gave consent to the experimental surgery before being taken off of life support. In the U.S., over 100,000 people are currently waiting for organ transplants, including 90,000 awaiting a kidney. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Colder than average temperatures continue. Northwesterly winds brought down the morning temperatures to around 5 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. But Ponghwa in Gyeongsang-Pukto province is showing sub-zero readings today. Meanwhile, Gyeongsang-do provinces could see light rain through the late afternoon, so have an umbrella handy if you're in that area. Over in Gohung in Jeollanam-do province, where the Nuri rocket is expected to blast off at 4 p.m., the weather does not seem to be a problem with a gentle wind under mostly sunny skies. Low temperatures are similar to yesterday, mid-single digits for most parts, while Busan is having a rainy morning. Then highs will be similar to or slightly lower than yesterday, rising to the mid-teens in most regions. Daegu will go up to 16 degrees, so there will be big gaps in readings today, so dress accordingly on your way out. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's the end of this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. Thank you for spending the past hour with us. We appreciate your viewership. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. I'll be back in just over an hour at 10 a.m. Korea time with our next newscast. Both Mo-kyan and I will be here at the same time on Friday, as well as Oh Se-young, for another New Day at Arirang. Wherever you're watching us around the world, thank you ever so much for tuning in. Goodbye.